same grind the soft scholarship guys go on all summer long. So when we can reward those guys, man, there's nothing better. Bert Auburn, you're on scholarship.
We're the flagship program in this state, right? And
a bullshit, a bullshit, a bullshit, a bullshit.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. Sunday, June 23rd, 9:38 p.m. local time, atop a hot, humid, but beautiful Houston, Texas. My name is Michael Ween, back for another episode and loaded show today, by the way, full of recruiting news, notes, insight, intel that you won't find anywhere else unless you browse the internet and get through a couple paywalls. And some actual betting lines have been released for some of Texas's marquee games, some early betting lines, although we're only 69 days away from kickoff of the Texas Longhorn season. So stuff is heating up here on Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports in terms of college football content. And then we're also going to have another episode on Tuesday to preview the NBA draft and maybe talk some more Texas-related things, maybe related to a baseball coaching search or a Texas basketball transfer portal visitor and what's happening right now with the basketball team. So make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you check out all of our other content that we put out under our live section on our YouTube channel. Check us out on Twitter. You can find us on Twitch and pretty much any other place that you want to listen to your podcast or watch your podcast for that matter. And joining me tonight, as always, as he does from Austin, Texas, the home of the Texas Longhorns, a man of many obligations, Mr. Emmy Nixon. What's up?
Nothing much, man. It's a full day for me today. This is one of the few off days I get on a weekend, so I'm enjoying this one. Whew. I mean, these betting lines that we're going to get to later in the show, I think there's definitely going to be some interesting conversation to come out of that. I'm excited for that part of the show for sure. And then the recruiting news, as always, we're always going to cover that. So I'm going to just let you get into that.
Well, before we do that, have you ever gotten home from vacation and then just not really unpacked for a while? Well, no, like you don't unpack for a while.
Yeah.
Well, I got home
every time
back to my apartment last night around 7:30ish, and I just had my golf bag, my suitcase, and kind of my other bag that I had stuff in, just sitting on the floor in there in my living room up until about 2 hours ago when I finally decided that I would unpack it. And I'm still not 100% finished. I'm planning to finish after this show, but I'm getting there. So it feels good once you finally are productive and you can unpack. And then a second note before we start this conversation, I'm actually playing over the next 2 months-ish in a recreational flag football league. So first of all, it's games on Sunday afternoons. So I have one game on Sunday afternoon every Sunday for the next 7 Sundays. And then after that, there might be playoffs depending on how well we perform. And it's a recreational league, and it's designed so that I can meet some new people, but also because I like to play flag football. And so today we had our first game. It was hot as shit out there.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So I had to drink a lot of water, and that's why I still have my hydro flask that I'm drinking out of as of right now. A lot of people I don't know that I'm still getting to know We have no chemistry. We didn't have any practices going in. And considering we did pretty well, but we did lose. So
Yeah,
we're
I
already
had
behind
joined like a similar type of thing, like a YMCA basketball league for a little while, and I'm not gonna lie, dude. Like I got absolutely cooked on defense.
Yeah, we played a team that looked like they had been together a while. But yeah, we'll see. I'll keep updating you on our Sunday night shows if we have them going forward on how that's going. But right now, we're
What's y'all's team name?
We're all Madden something.
Oh.
We were given a team name, so
All right, yeah.
I'll let you know if that changes. But that's it for right now.
Cool.
And by the way, I played kind of this hybrid receiver tight end today. My position will probably change over the next couple of weeks. Might get to play some quarterback. We'll see. And then everyone plays defense. So I was playing a hybrid like middle linebacker safety role today. And I played better on defense than I did on offense.
Yeah, honestly, like I think obviously like it's part of the NFL's plan with like all the marketing stuff they do, but I think flag football is just gonna fucking explode in the next few years. Like it just with all of the, hype for the upcoming Olympics that it's gonna be in 2028. Like I just think it's inevitable.
Yeah. Okay. I actually want to get into these betting lines before we get into the recruiting stuff because I figured
All right.
it would, be a 10, 15-minute conversation. So the lines to the three big marquee games of the Texas football season are out. And so we're talking about Michigan and Ann Arbor, week 2. We're talking about the Georgia game, and we're talking about Red River. And so the first question I'm going to pose to you to start off this conversation is, of those 3 lines that were released, and you can kind of bring them to everyone's attention if you have them in front of you, what stood out to you?
Well, Texas at Michigan. Texas is a 2.5-point favorite as of right now. Texas versus OU. Texas is a 10.5-point favorite, so a touchdown and a field goal, or over a touchdown and field, basically 2 touchdowns. And then Georgia at Texas. Texas is a 1.5-point underdog, so basically a pick 'em there. The one that stood out to me was actually OU. I think just in like the Sark Venables era of this rivalry, like it hasn't really felt like a given team has actually had like such a huge edge in it. That in my opinion, like for that type of game in that environment, like the underdog is always gonna come out swinging, come out ready to play. That's just how it is. That it always was like that when Texas was the underdog, and it'll be like that with Oklahoma as the underdog too. So I obviously, besides the whole 49-0 game, I just don't really envision a 2-possession game in a Red River rivalry. I just don't. I think it'll be within a touchdown.
That's the, I think, line that stood out to most originally. In the past 11 matchups between Texas and Oklahoma, and this is why also on our last Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports episode, when we did our 10 most important or most intriguing games list, go check that out. I had Texas Oklahoma on the list for this one of these particular reasons is the underdog always puts up a fight. And in the past 11 meetings, the favorite in this matchup, in this particular game, is 6-5. So it's pretty even favorite to underdog here in the past decade. The 10.5-point spread isn't as surprising to me when you look at what they're probably looking at in Vegas, which is that Texas has a third-year returning veteran starting quarterback that should be, if everything goes according to plan, a
In New
finalist
York.
for the Heisman Trophy
Yeah.
and one of the top 3 to 5 quarterbacks in the country, a first-round pick, whereas Oklahoma has basically a redshirt freshman quarterback in Jackson Arnold who's played in one game so far in his career, and that was the bowl game this past year against Arizona, a game where you saw the bright side, the 5-star side of Jackson Arnold with some pretty spectacular stuff, but you also saw what typically a young quarterback looks like with some interceptions and some mistakes. And then what they're probably also looking at is the fact that OU is totally rebuilding their offensive line, whereas Texas returns 4 or 5 starters on the offensive line. OU, they have talent up there. Venables has generally done a good job recruiting that spot. They have a really good offensive line coach, but they lost 4 out of 5 starters on the offensive line. And when you really look at it, they only have 3 starters returning on offense. So I look at that aspect of it and I think to myself, okay, Texas being favored, maybe 5.5, 6.5 makes sense. I think 10.5 is a little much considering that when you look at Oklahoma's defense with what they did at the portal and how much they have coming back with one of the best free safeties in the SEC and Billy Bowman Jr., who's going to be a senior, Danny Stutzman, maybe the best middle linebacker or one of the best middle linebackers this year in the SEC coming back. He's going to be a senior, along with Ethan Downs on the defensive line, who's a 3-year starter and a 2-time sacks leader for them. He's going to be a senior. They bring in a guy like Dominic Williams, who Texas recruited, went into the transfer portal from TCU as a productive defensive lineman. Not necessarily a game changer, but he adds depth to their defensive line. They're going to have a really experienced defense. They have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 starters returning on defense. And if you look at it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them are juniors and seniors. So they're going to have an experienced veteran defense with Brent Venables in year number 3, a defense that I think, and they did it last year at points in times, can give the Texas offense trouble, especially when you consider that Texas is bringing in a lot of new pieces on offense. They're very talented pieces, but they're bringing in an entirely new receiving force.
Yeah, that's never easy. I definitely agree with everything you're saying in terms of like roster versus roster. There's definitely a clear gap there for sure. But my point was more so just within the context of that game. I just think, and also the context of what I think is going to be a rough go of it for Oklahoma in the SEC with the schedule that they have, the gauntlet that they're going to have to be facing. I think there's just going to be a lot of pride there on the Oklahoma side. And I think if Oklahoma plays their best football game of the year against Texas, I would not be surprised by that. And I think that would probably be enough to cover, whatever spread you may throw out, like whether Texas wins or loses. I think it'll be a tight game.
Yeah, and Oklahoma generally does play some of their best football against Texas every year. It's a game that they bookmark on their schedule year in, year out. And I think Texas does the same, of course. And it's really, as Josh Pate likes to say, one of the more great environments in college football. It doesn't get enough credit for the rivalry that it is, although OU, aside from a couple games the last 10 years, has really dominated this rivalry, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
But I think this year it becomes even more important considering First time that it's an SEC matchup.
Yeah.
It's a breakthrough year for both these programs into the SEC. And it's kind of the tiebreak game between Venables and Sark. Sark got him the first time. It was an ugly affair, as we know. Oklahoma was playing basically without a quarterback, and Texas beat them 49-0 in that 8-5 season for Sark in year 2 years ago. And then this year, you, of course, had the back and forth affair with OU winning on that game-winning drive by Dylan Gabriel. So both of them have won. This is year 3. This is the third matchup between the two coaches. It's an offensive-minded coach against a defensive-minded coach, and they're going to go at it. It's experienced quarterback versus non-experienced quarterback. They're going to go at it. It's a more talented roster versus a very talented roster, but they're relying on a couple things to go their way, mainly the offensive line to gel very quickly and the quarterback to perform at a higher than expected level for OU to really contend in the SEC in year 1. But absolutely, I think that line is going to come down. And I do think if it was 10.5, I would pick Oklahoma to cover. I'd right now put it more at around Texas minus 5.5.
Yeah.
More so than I do Texas minus 10.5. Now,
All right, let's
with
touch
the
on these last two and then
Yeah.
move right along. So the Georgia line, Georgia's favored plus 1.5 at Texas. Your thoughts?
I think that seems about right. I mean, if we really think about it, it could be a top 3 matchup, could even be a 1 versus 2 matchup. The top 2 favorites in the Heisman Trophy conversation right now. Think about Georgia. I mean, they're returning a lot. As much as people like to think that Georgia loses a ton year over year, and they do, like they constantly put a lot of guys into the NFL, they still bring back, I mean, a lot. They bring back 2 receivers, a quarterback. They bring in Trevor Etienne from Florida at running back. They have a lot coming back. I mean, they really do. And when you stack talent like Kirby Smart has, both in recruiting and in the portal, you would expect that. It's at DKR, and it's going to be a nutty environment, one of the biggest games we've ever seen in Austin, Texas. And Texas, well, they're not quite on par in terms of man-for-man talent with Georgia. They're the next thing closest to it. And I think the home field advantage does play a big role in this. I even just given benefit of the doubt to the boys of college football, the Georgia Bulldogs, who probably should have been in the playoff last year, if we really think about it. I maybe even venture to say that they should maybe be like 2.5, 3-point favorites. But I mean, what are we really talking about here?
Yeah, like we're talking about a point, and it's June 23rd. So
yeah, so that's my stance on it. I feel like it's about right.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, Michigan is a 2.5-point dog at home in the Big House.
Well, Oklahoma knows who their quarterback's going to be. They just don't know if he's going to be how good he's going to be.
Yeah.
Michigan, coming off a national championship, thinks they know who it's going to be, but they don't really know. And the guy that they think it's going to be has barely even thrown a pass in a game, much less a game the magnitude of Texas-Michigan. Now, when you think about this Michigan game, I know there are a lot of Texas fans that think to themselves, we have the advantage at quarterback, we have the more talented roster, and we should expect to go in there and beat Michigan. But there's the other side to it for more realistic fans They are the defending champions. They return a lot on defense.
Yep.
They're going to be really, really tough on that side of the ball, especially up front. They have one of the best corner in the nation for my money coming back in Will Johnson. They're going to have a great running game. They're really going to test this new look Texas interior defensive line without Sweat and Murphy. I expect Texas, if they play their A game, to win that game because they're just more talented and skilled than Michigan is. They should win that game with the quarterback advantage, the continuity advantage, with their coordinators who have been there multiple years, and Sark, who's now going into year 4, with 4 of the 5 starters on the offensive line coming back. So they are kind of like well-equipped and experienced to handle what the Texas or the Michigan defensive front will present. But at the same time, like,
We're the flagship.
I don't know why that happened. At the same time, like, I can see like that they are the defending champions. They're going to test this new look Texas defense, and that defense could pose problems for the Texas offense. So Texas minus 2.5 on paper probably makes sense. But I would just, and look, I expect Texas to win that game. If they don't, they'd be setting themselves behind the 8 ball a little bit in terms of what I think a lot of people expect from them this year.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I would caution people who think Texas is going to go in there and beat them by 2 touchdowns or more than that, because I have seen those people. I would caution them to take their foot and put it on the brake a little bit before going that far.
Yeah, I think the line is about right, but my take on it is like if we played them, say, week 5,
yeah,
I think this line would be more just like a pick 'em, just like a straight up pick 'em.
I think because it's week 2, it gives Texas an advantage.
Like less of a weather element as well. A 1 week of experience starter at quarterback against what we expect to be a improved pass rush for Texas. That's I think a big part of it. Now, I don't know, what Michigan's offense will kind of will look like in terms of, some of the plays that J.J. McCarthy would make on third down. Like he really did do a lot in terms of running it on first and second down. And when that didn't work, he would kind of just make a play on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 11. Like you got to give him credit for what he was able to do in that type of aspect. So from that standpoint, I wonder if Michigan's offense is going to come out with a little bit of a different look, maybe a little bit more modernized, a little bit more throw heavy, just to get the quarterback into rhythm. But that's just, I don't know, that's just a question we're going to have to see answered once they play. There's no real way to know for sure.
And one more note before we move on. This game was supposed originally to be in Austin. But as part of the agreement for Texas to get into the SEC this year, rather than waiting another year, Texas had to agree to play Michigan in Ann Arbor rather than in Austin. So that changed, and that does give Michigan a built-in advantage, given that you are playing in the big house.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, not many teams, if any, have gone in and beaten them in that place in a couple of years. So we'll have to see. We'll just have to see.
Yeah, and this is a big house coming off a national championship. So
yeah, exactly.
It'll be even more buzzing, honestly.
And both teams, one thing I actually forgot to mention is both teams will be coming off games where they presumably win easily. In week 1, Texas against Colorado State. Michigan, I don't know who they play, but I would presume it would be an easy victory. Going into, in my opinion, the biggest non-conference game of the season, just like you could argue Texas had last year. When we talk about the Texas-Georgia game, though, the Texas Oklahoma game, and we talk about that 10.5-point spread, Oklahoma, well, both teams get a bye the week going into the game, as they always pretty much do. Texas, after Oklahoma, has to go home and play Georgia. Whereas Oklahoma, I believe, has to play South Carolina after. And so you can also factor into that a little bit, possibly once we
Like
get
a trap
closer to
game.
the time. Like,
Maybe.
is Texas looking ahead to that Georgia game a little bit? We'll have to see. We don't know yet. Because we don't know where things will stand at that point. Now, Texas is undefeated going into that game. I think a lot of people would expect them to split those two games realistically, back to back. And at that point, I mean, in this new era of the 12-team college football playoff, in the SEC, you're going to get 2 mulligans. Like, you're probably allowed 2 losses. 3, you're putting yourself in a very precarious position, most likely. There might be
I would say 2 competitive losses.
Yeah. You're putting yourself in a very precarious position if you lose 3. But if Texas goes into that Oklahoma game undefeated, it'll be there'll be a little less pressure. Whereas if they lose to Michigan, you have to split one of those. You have to split that 2-game stretch, or else you're going
And
to
then win out.
put yourself in a precarious position. All right. Is that all we have on the betting lines for right now?
Yeah. We actually were planning to go about 15 minutes on that topic, but
Yeah.
once we got into it,
It's okay.
I mean, yeah,
All right.
it is what it is. It was a good conversation. Let's move into this recruiting stuff.
Yeah. Let's do that. So where do I want to start? Okay, let's just start with the elephant in the room. And that's DeCorian Moore, the 5-star receiver out of Duncanville. So everyone remembers he decommitted from LSU probably about a month ago at this point, a couple weeks back. He took an official visit to Ohio State first. That went really well. There were people coming out of that visit who thought Ohio State made up a lot of ground on Texas, and potentially some thought maybe they could be on even ground with Texas. Others thought Ohio State made up ground, but they didn't quite do enough. LSU actually got him back on campus the next week. Good visit. He just decommitted from there. But it didn't really seem like there was much to think about there. Then he visits Texas, and I'll get to that in a second. This weekend, he visited Oregon. And the sense coming out of that visit is Oregon did a number on him. They brought out all the stops. He has some interest in Oregon. But the sense still is, with as much ground as Oregon may have made up, it still might not be enough to catch the Longhorns. Yeah. Last weekend, he visited Texas, and himself and 11 of his family members were on the visit. Something we really have never, ever seen before. The sense was coming out of that visit that Texas absolutely blew him and his family away with the presentation, with the entire weekend, with the attention that he got. He was basically the guy last weekend. There was one other guy that we'll talk about, big target, and Riley Pettijohn on campus last weekend, the linebacker out of McKinney. But DeCorian Moore was the guy, and he got the red carpet rolled out for him, and he was absolutely blown away. Texas knocked it out of the park. And the sense today is, even with the other visits that he's taken, it would be a massive if he doesn't announce for Texas at some point. Now, his family and him are set on announcing the decision prior to his senior season at Duncanville. And his mom, who he is very close with, has said he will announce by August 13th. It will not be later than August 13th. I get the sense from everything that I read and from people connected to the situation that he's going to announce for Texas sooner rather than later. And he is one of the two white whales, in a sense, in this recruiting class. For my money, the best wide receiver in the country. There are people in the recruiting industry who say if they could, he would be a 6-star wide receiver.
Wow.
So I think Dakorien Moore, barring something like an earthquake shift in his recruitment, is going to be a Longhorn. And just for good measure, and you can ask me any questions on his situation, I'm going to share my screen and show you this quick picture so this doesn't get too monotonous of him on his official visit to Texas. There he is. Dakorien Moore, decked out in his SEC Texas icy white uniform on his official visit to the Longhorns last weekend. And the sense is that will be him next fall.
Yeah, the thing is, like, obviously Oregon, the whole geographical argument, like everybody knows that. But beyond that, though, it's also like, who do you want throwing passes to? Arch Manning, or for Oregon, I think it would be Dante Moore, their transfer from UCLA, who he didn't have a bad season at UCLA. True freshman, was, obviously kind of just thrown into the fire. It didn't really go fantastic. But I do think that's a clear point where Texas has an edge.
Absolutely. And so, again, he visited Ohio State, he visited LSU, he visited Oregon this past weekend. It just wrapped up today. He actually had a couple family members who live in Austin who came back from the Oregon visit, flew into the Austin International Airport today. In fact, I want to show you guys this because we have to. They flew in today and they were seen at the airport after the Oregon visit, given the hook'em. If you're a family member of Dakorien Moore and you're just coming from Eugene back to Austin and you're set on going to Oregon, I don't know why you're throwing up the hook'em. That's just me. Let me show you this before we move on to the other wide receiver targets that I'm sure you guys want to hear about that visited this weekend. Just wrapped up today. This is the picture that I'm talking about here. You see Moore in the background right here with a lot of his family and friends on the visit, all wearing Texas Longhorn gear. This was last weekend. And there's another picture of him wearing the Xavier Worthy 1, by the way, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Texas gave him the full treatment there. Okay. Let's move on to the other part of the trio of receivers that some people think Texas could get all three of these guys. I'm kind of more pessimistic than I am optimistic on that front. I just don't foresee 3 5-star wide receivers signing with Texas when it comes to signing day in December.
Yeah, within the same class, they would just be stepping on each other's toes at that point.
Okay, so here's where I sit with, and while I do this, while I talk, I'm going to try to multitask and pull up some Jamie French Kalik Lockett content here. Where do we stand with Jamie French? Well, the sense I get with him is he had a very good visit to Texas this weekend. He loves the Texas culture, and that's again a recurring theme over
it's a
and over
buzzword.
again from these prospects. There's just a different vibe on campus, the coaching staff, the relationships that they're building, the culture with the players that are hosting these guys on their visits. That everyone says it. Culture is awesome right now on campus, on the 40 acres in terms of the football program. And that couldn't be said 3 years ago when Sark got to campus.
Yeah.
And was hired at Texas. He had a great visit. He said of all the coaches that are recruiting him, and again, he's being recruited by Miami, he's being recruited by LSU, and then two schools are kind of on the outside looking in right now, Ohio State and Tennessee. I get the sense, and he said this before, he kind of backed off of it lately just because a lot of these guys want to have some misdirection and some suspense in their recruitment. He did come out a couple weeks ago, maybe closer to a month ago, after he first visited Texas, once he decommitted from Alabama, and said, Texas is my number one, LSU is my number two, and Miami's my number three. He's since backed off of that pecking order and said they're all pretty much on even ground right now. But sources closest to the situation after his visits that wrapped up with Texas this weekend get the sense that Texas is the leader still. He might not say it openly like he did a couple weeks ago, but they're the leader. I think they were the leader. They are the leader. I feel pretty good that Texas is going to end up with both Jamie French and De'Corian Moore in this class, 2 5-star wide receiver prospects. He's got a really good relationship with Chris Jackson, the Texas wide receivers coach, who won a big out-of-state recruitment in his first year as the Texas wide receivers coach last year. You can name that guy, right? Ryan Wingo from the state of Missouri. Jamie French coming from the state of Florida, from the Jacksonville area. I get the sense that he's going to announce August 30th. And while LSU and Miami also made good impressions on him on their respective visits, Texas blew him and his parents away on this weekend's visit, and getting to spend time with Ryan Wingo, who was his player host, along with Arch Manning, who I was told today played a humongous part in this weekend's official visit weekend in just recruiting some of these guys. Jamie French is most likely going to end up a Longhorn. Now, can Texas get all three of De'Corian Moore, Jamie French, and Kalik Lockett? Here's how I'll put it. I think Texas could get commitments from all three in July/August. I don't know that I see all three signing with Texas. I do definitely see De'Corian Moore signing with Texas. And I do probably envision Jamie French signing with Texas. The wild card in this whole equation is Kalik Lockett from Saxe, Texas. And I think there are mixed vibes on his recruitment. He visited Texas. The visit went really well. He took a midweek to Alabama this past week. And then he also took a visit last weekend to Texas A&M, who's pushing hard for his commitment. I get the sense that this is a Texas A&M, Alabama battle. And at the end of the day, one source said that Texas came into the weekend a slight leader. and they left the weekend an even bigger leader. And if that's the case, that's awesome news. But other sources have said this is not as clear cut and dry as maybe Decorian Moore and Jamie French are. And I just think even if Khalid Lockett were to commit, there would be too many other schools coming at him closer to signing day saying, you can be the guy in our recruiting class. You can be the receiver in our class, whereas you're not going to be the focus in this Texas class. That's always and will be, no matter what you say, Decorian Moore.
Yeah.
So, and then you also have Jamie French there. So here's how I'll put it. Decorian Moore is going to Texas. If he doesn't, lots of recruiting insiders need to be fired. Jamie French, I put my confidence meter right now at around 75, 80% that he's going to end up at Texas. He's going to announce August 30th. We don't know the exact date on Decorian Moore, but we know it's going to be before August 13th. So sometime in July or early August before his season starts. And then Khalid Lockett, I think, will announce sometime in July when a lot of these commitments will go down. Again, we're moving from official visit season to commitment season.
Yeah.
Here in July. And I think he could announce for Texas, but I'm more pessimistic on that front that he'll actually sign with Texas. So that's where we stand on the receivers. Do you have any questions on those guys?
Well, there's very few, recruiting stories that like truly excite me just because I'm so new to this whole side of the sport. And to be honest, before I was one of those college football fans. I was like, okay, you recruited so-and-so, great, but like, let's see them on the field, yada, yada, yada. But now that I'm getting into it on this side of things, like now that I'm actually seeing Decorian Moore and his tape, his highlights, I mean, how could you not get excited about that? There's just no way you couldn't. My take on the whole, recruiting all three thing is, I don't know. Why not? Offer all of them and then just see what happens. If you have an embarrassment of riches, then great. If one of them decommits later, then so be it. I just would rather them, go for all three and end up with two of three than back out of one of them and end up with one of three.
Yeah, you absolutely go after all of them because I think you still have a good chance of getting all three. According to some people really well connected to the program. I'm more pessimistic on it. We'll see where it goes. But you absolutely have to get Decorian Moore. Yeah. No matter what else happens, you have to get that guy. And I think they will. Let me see. My Twitter on my computer isn't working to the best of the ability. So I'll see if I can get that working. And we'll see if we can get some more pictures pulled up here. But while I work on that, let's move on to talk about some other news. So let's see what position. Well, let's go over some Texas commits real fast. This will be easy. So this weekend, on their big weekend, June 21st to June 23rd, Texas had 7 guys that have already committed to Texas on campus. Some of them recently committed. Example, James Simon, the running back out of Shreveport, Louisiana, who we talked about, I think, either on our last episode or the episode before that. They also had their quarterback commit, KJ Lacey, from Saraland, Alabama, on campus for the 2025 class.
Killing it in the Elite 11, by the way.
Yep. We'll talk about the Elite 11 when we get into the quarterback stuff. They had the 3 offensive linemen that they have committed right now on campus. And by the way, Texas in this class is going to take 5 offensive linemen, and I could see Sark even taking 6 offensive linemen in this class. But they're going to take 5 minimum. 3 of those spots have been filled. The 2 twins from Cedar Hill, Jordan and Devin Coleman, who you heard about, and then Jackson Christian out of Port Neches Groves, who also committed a couple weeks back. He was on campus. James Simon, one of their running back commits for this class, was on campus. Darren chips in and says, I'm thinking we will get Moore and French. And Darren, I 100% agree.
Yeah,
I think
I'm with you
right now. Khalif Lockett is more of a wild card at this point. And to be clear, like, Khalif Lockett loves Texas, but there's a dynamic to this equation that you don't see every day. And it's a first world problem that Texas is dealing with right now. And then Elijah Bo Barnes, the linebacker commit out of Dallas Skyline High School, was on campus. Here's the sense I get with all those guys. KJ Lacey was at the Elite 11. We'll talk more about that later. Comes to his official visit at Texas, the only official visit he's taking, and says he's 100% locked in. The Keelan Russell stuff isn't going to happen. He's at Alabama. He's the guy. Texas still feels that he could be Bryce Young 2.0. He's their guy in this class. This weekend reaffirmed his commitment. He's locked in. He's shutting everything down. He is the Texas quarterback in the 2024 cycle. James Simon, who recently committed, like in the past month, to Texas, the running back out of Shreveport, Louisiana, who I really like, the 4-star running back, came in fresh off his commitment a couple weeks ago. And just again, this weekend was awesome. Reaffirmed his commitment. He's 100% locked in. Don't expect him to take any more visits anytime soon. Elijah Bo Barnes, same thing. Locked into Texas, committed a couple months ago. He's locked in 100%. The 3 offensive linemen, same sentiment. All feel good about their decisions to Texas. And then who am I forgetting?
It was a cornerback, right? Recent
quarterback.
Let's see.
It'll come to me. But that's the sense for the Texas official visitors, or the Texas commits that visited this past weekend. Last weekend, along with Decoria Moore, you had Lance Jackson, who's a super blue chip guy who I think could end up being a 5-star. He's just an absolute monster off the edge. He needs to be more celebrated. The fact that Texas picked up his commitment. It was early on in the cycle. It was back January, February timeline. But if you look at his body, he's a monster.
Yeah.
He was in last weekend. He's 100% committed. He's not going anywhere. He's not taking any other visits. The same thing with the other Texas running back commit, Mr. Ricky Stewart Jr. He's 100% locked in. So Texas has their 2 running backs in this class. They have their primary edge rush prospect in Lance Jackson, who's not going anywhere. And then this past weekend, they also had Amari Winston, the tight end commit out of Calhoun, Georgia, who was flirting with Auburn the past couple weeks. There were rumors a couple weeks ago that he might flip to Auburn. But the sense is now, after this visit, he's sticking with Texas and he's pretty much shutting everything down. Any questions on the Texas commits before we get into a couple other guys?
No. I'm more excited to get into this Michael Fasusi talk.
Oh, yeah. We need to do this before we get out of here. So the sense I get with Michael Fasusi, is he, similarly to Decorian Moore last weekend, got the priority treatment this weekend. Because in my opinion, he, along with Decorian Moore, are the two white whales in this recruiting cycle of these Texas targets. You have to get Fasusi, and you have to get Decorian Moore to make this a successful class, in my opinion. The offensive tackle out of Louisville, who, by the way, just looks like $1 million. And I'm going to try
Dude,
to.
I don't know how I feel about some of the, the older I get, I'm turning 23 this year. Like some of the recruiting stuff, like talking about their bodies, it just feels kind of predatory. I don't know. Like there's no other way around it. Like I don't know how to avoid that. It feels weird.
I don't know. This is how people talk. I mean, it's more.
I mean, but you're not wrong though. I mean, the kid's a beast. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, there's an interesting dynamic to his recruitment. So some people view, I think there's a consensus that Texas is the leader. Now, to what extent? Opinions vary. The real question here is who's the second team in his recruitment? It's a 3-horse race. It's Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and Texas. That's what it is with Michael Fasusi. He took a visit to Oklahoma last weekend. And the weekend before, he was on A&M's campus. The sense after the A&M visit was, shit, A&M is making wins in this recruitment. They might even be on even footing with Texas right now. They have a really good shot at Fasusi. They're really pushing for a commitment here. Then the Oklahoma visit happened, and the sense was, well, Oklahoma made some waves. Now they're kind of in the number 2 position. I think both those schools are threats to Texas. I don't think this is a 100% slam dunk as of right now. And I do think this recruitment will go a little later than some of these others might, just because, I mean, if you're Michael Fasusi, why wouldn't you drag it out a little longer? You have all the leverage in this situation in terms of NIL, how much money you can get, the kind of prospect that you are, being a top 3 offensive tackle in the country, the desperation that a program like A&M feels with the state of their offensive line, needing a guy like him to really feel good about the start to the Mike Elko era. And then with Oklahoma trying to build that offensive line, Brent Venables being a really good recruiter so far, I think better than people expected. Him being the centerpiece of that class would really be kind of the thing.
Yeah, that would hurt.
The commonality here is, even after his visit today, which went great, by the way, and there's a video out on social media of him in the car with Sark. He really got the full treatment. The commonality is Texas. And if I had to put my confidence meter on Michael Fasusi right now, I'd put it at about 65, 70% that he ends up at Texas. But if you think that Texas is just going to ride off into the sunset in this recruitment and easily expect Fasusi to commit to Texas and just
it's never that simple.
Happen, I don't know. I just wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I think A&M and Oklahoma are still pushing there.
I think the thing that me and the 4 people in this stream right now are thinking, like, as a fellow Michael, like, if you were 6'6", 330 pounds, what would you do?
I mean, yeah. He is, though.
I'd probably rob a store if I was that big, honestly. Just be like, hey, give me your money. And be like, okay.
He's
yes,
got
sir.
he's got great relationship with Kyle Flood, the Texas offensive line coach. He's got really good relationship with Sark. He loves Texas. The question is, I think at this point, who is the biggest threat? Texas A&M or Oklahoma? If I had to guess, I think it's A&M. Because A&M, say what you want about them, but they can open up the pocketbooks.
Yeah.
So
That's
we'll
really
see
all
where
they
that
got,
goes.
though. Like,
We'll see where that goes.
I've been to College Station, and I don't really understand the hype, to be honest. It's kind of ass.
I have to. I would agree with you there, but
Yeah, it
it's
is what it
different.
is.
It's different when you're offered $1 million in NIL.
Yeah.
So there we go. A couple other things I think we need to mention before we sign off for tonight. Riley Pettijohn, borderline 5-star linebacker from McKinney, Texas, who's being recruited as the centerpiece of a Texas linebacker class that is very, very important this year, given that you return. So after this year, Maurice Blackwell and David Binder are gone. You'll return Anthony Hill, and you have some other younger guys that are talented but inexperienced, and you don't really know at this point which guy is going to be the guy that kind of rises from that pack from the big linebacker class a couple of years ago. But you only took one linebacker in Ty Anthony Smith, who you flipped from A&M on signing day last year in last year's class. So given that 2 linebackers leave the program after this year, and the only real proven guy that's going to return is Anthony Hill, the linebacker recruiting this year ranks in like my top 2 positions that are the most important.
And the fact that we're in the SEC now.
And the fact that we're in the SEC and all this kind of stuff. It's up there with defensive line and tight end.
For sure.
Those are my top 3 most important recruiting positions this year. Because you don't really worry about offensive line all that much. I don't worry about receiver at all. I don't worry about quarterback. I don't worry about running back. I don't even really worry at this point about secondary recruiting, given Texas's track record there the past couple of years. I do worry, though, about definitely defensive line recruiting, number 1, tight end recruiting, and linebacker recruiting are my 3 biggest, I wouldn't say concerns. Some are more concerning than others, but 3 most important in this class. And I think Texas is planning to take 3 or 4 linebackers in this class. They already have one in the fold, Elijah Bo Barnes, who's a low mid 4-star from Dallas Skyline. The sense a couple weeks ago was Texas is a massive leader for Riley Pettijohn. And I have gotten questions from some of my other friends. As Riley Pettijohn, right now, I think he ranks 33 or 34th in the Rivals recruiting rankings in the nation. He's the nation's number 2 overall linebacker, number 1 in the state of Texas. And I've gotten the question, like, how does he compare in terms of his play style to Anthony Hill? And what I would tell people on that in a general sense, and maybe we can dive deeper into it another time, I think Anthony Hill is more of the downhill, physical specimen thumper type, whereas Pettijohn is more of the sideline to sideline speed, athleticism guy.
It's like the difference between, say, who's a linebacker that rushes the passer a lot. I mean, I guess Michael Parsons, or comparing that to like a DeMario Davis. Like, it's just a completely different type of player.
Mm-hmm. And so the sense I get, to sum it up, is Texas still leads in this recruitment. I feel pretty good about Pettijohn coming to Texas. I think he'll pair very well with Bo Barnes and maybe like a Jonathan Cunningham or a Madden Faramo, who also visited this weekend, has been a heavy Tech Notre Dame lean. We won't talk about him as much in this episode, but maybe in another episode soon, if that really starts to heat up. I've always felt really good about Pettijohn. I feel a little less confident today than I did, say, a month or two ago. But Ohio State has made waves with their official visit. A&M still in the mix, although I don't think they're going to have enough to overtake Texas or Ohio State. And then USC is also heavily in this mix. I think it's going to come down to Ohio State, USC, and Texas. And I think Texas will win out. But he had a good visit. They really impressed the father, which is important. You have to impress the parents on these official visits. Pettijohn has always loved Texas. I think Johnny Nansen is doing a great job in recruiting so far in his first year in the program. He's already made an indelible impact, even in the transfer portal, with some of the work that he was able to do on the defensive line with his connections. And he's doing it with these linebackers, already being able to get a Bo Barnes and being the leader for a Jonathan Cunningham and maybe a Riley Pettijohn. I think more so even than the defensive line or maybe even tight end, Texas is actually shaping up to do what it needs to do at the linebacker position, because I do think they're going to get Jonathan Cunningham out of North Crowley High School, who's a 4-star linebacker. That could go down anytime now, I think probably in the next couple of weeks. I do think they're still going to get Pettijohn, although it's not as much of a slam dunk as I would have thought maybe a couple weeks ago. I think I'd put my confidence meter at around 60%, 65%, whereas if you asked me 4 weeks ago, it would have been closer to 85%. So still feel good about Pettijohn. In terms of must-get guys in this recruiting class, I'd put Fasusi and Moore on a tier of their own. And then in that tier 2, I would have a bunch of guys. The Jamie Frenches of the world, Riley Pettijohns, Khalid Lockett's. And then another guy, which we're going to talk about before we get off of here, Nick Townsend, a tight end out of Spring Decaney here in the Houston area. He's very important. They have Amari Winston committed. He's more of a low 4-star. Nick Townsend, I think, is a super blue chip guy. He's a high 4-star, maybe even a 5-star when it's all said and done. Texas is really selling him on being the
guy at that spot.
The guy at that spot, but being kind of the Jatavion Sanders of the future. Go watch his tape. We'll watch it sometime here on this podcast. But if you have the time, Nick Townsend out of Spring Decaney had a really good visit this weekend, and I feel pretty good about Texas being the choice there after all of his visits. I think it's more probably of a Texas-Alabama battle than it is anything else, because he did recently take a visit to Alabama. But by the way, lots of people have doubted Kalen DeBoer and how he would recruit going into the SEC. He's doing just fine right now. And
I don't know why, but
probably going to end up with like a top 6 class. So I wouldn't go too far there. But yes, Nick Townsend, given that Keati Armstrong, who recently committed to A&M and was the other top tight end in the state of Texas, recently committed to A&M on his official visit. Nick Townsend becomes the priority there, and he's getting announced July 10th. So we're a couple weeks away from that, but I expect that to be Texas. And then you have a really nice 2 tight end class for this year, which bodes well for them, given they only got one last year in Jordan Washington, who I think could still find a role for himself. He did make a couple plays in the spring game this this past year as a freshman. I really like him too. But beyond that, they really don't have anything proven at tight end aside from Amari Nyblack, who they brought in the transfer portal. And he could be a guy that leaves after this year for the draft if he has a good enough year. So tight end's a big position this year. I feel better about tight end and linebacker and the outlook there than I do defensive line. I think we're going to have to save the defensive line for another time. So any questions on recruiting, these official visits, any other positions, anything before we make final remarks and get out of here for tonight?
I mean, we covered a lot tonight. I think it's better we just leave it at that. I think we covered just about everything.
Yeah.
So
Well,
good
not
episode.
not everything, but we covered most of the big guys and their official visits and how they went and where things stand. We covered pretty much all the Texas commits, the 3 big receivers, a big linebacker, the biggest offensive lineman, a big tight end. We were pretty much all over the place. So I'll tell you what, guys, the recruiting stuff doesn't stop. It just does not. So on Tuesday, on that episode, we make a promise to you. We're gonna talk about a couple things. We're doing some kind of NBA draft something, and then one of our other segments is going to be this quarterback discussion, the Diabell commitment for 2026. We're going to kind of do a post-Arch Manning, because we know Arch is the next guy up. But we're going to do kind of a post-Arch Manning quarterback comparison, if you will, between Trey Owens, KJ Lacey, and Diabell. I think that'll be interesting. That'll be fun. We're going to watch all their tapes. We're going to do something like that. We're going to talk about Bell's commitment. And then I might have some rankings for you guys on how I would rank the current Texas commits. And then we'll do our NBA draft stuff. So that's going to be that. Things could get thrown off a little bit if we get Texas baseball coaching news before then, or we get this Arthur Kaluma stuff that breaks, maybe potentially off of his official visit tomorrow for the basketball team. But we'll see. But until then, and one more thing I wanted to address, because I've gotten this question a lot. What's the difference between an official visit and an unofficial visit? Because a lot of people don't know that. Do you know it? Because if you know it, I don't really have to say it. But if you don't know it,
honestly, I don't know. No.
Okay. The basic difference at a very high level is official visits. You get a limited number of them that you can take, and everything is paid for by the school. They're 48-hour visits, Friday to Sunday, exactly 48 hours. You can't be on the campus for more than 48 hours. Everything's paid for by the school. So the way these Texas official visits generally work is if you live in the state of Texas, Texas has a driver that comes to pick you up wherever you live, and they drive you all the way to campus. They put you in the nicest hotel in Austin, the Four Seasons. And then that Friday, they have a lot of different meetings. CDC comes to speak. This is generally what I know from the outside looking in. They meet with some of the coaches. They have kind of a meet and greet. They meet some of the coaches. They have a big event with CDC talking. They take pictures in their uniform. They have a photo shoot. Saturday, they'll do some things in the city. They take all these official visitors to Topgolf every weekend on Saturday evening as kind of like a fun getaway event. Take them to see some of the city. The players will then go off with their player hosts. Some might want to go to the Lamborghini dealership to look at the Lamborghinis. Some might want to go, down to 6th Street to see the city. Everything works out kind of in a very organized fashion. Last night they had karaoke night. That went very awkwardly, as I understand it. They do some fun stuff. They also have some other football related meetings where they talk about the nutrition side of things. They get to see the nutrition plan. They talk with the strength and conditioning coaches. They talk with the coaches. And then Sunday, when these visits wrap up, each player gets a one-on-one with Sark. And some of these one-on-ones, you get silent commitments that aren't publicized yet, where a player will tell Sark, I'm committing to Texas. I'm just not announcing it publicly yet. That's called a silent commitment. An unofficial visit is on the prospect's own time and money. You can take those pretty much whenever you want and as many times as you want, but it's not paid for by the school. And you don't get as much of a special treatment on those visits as you do the official visits. So that's the difference at a high level of unofficial and official visits. So yeah, that's going to do it for tonight. Please tune in on Tuesday for our NBA draft preview and our quarterback discussion, maybe some other stuff, and we'll see you then. But until then, hook 'em horns, and let's go get Decoria Moore and Michael Fasusi at all costs.
Oh yeah.
Peace out.